Hi, I'm Phil Craig.
And I'm Andrew Loney.
And together we aim to bring you the most scandalous stories and some of the most scandalous people in history. So thanks for joining us here on the Scandal Mongers podcast.
Well, back to the Royals this week, and lots of things happening and lots of recollections varying about events. And it's the Harry and Meghan show again.
Well, if it's one story we've covered since the beginning of this podcast, it's them, isn't it? And so I'm afraid we've left Mr. Putin for another day, and we thought we should react.
Our viewers would probably prefer that.
Well, I don't know. The ones monitoring you, Andrew, the ones from the establishment that are monitoring.
They must be getting
thing to do.
Bored of Harry and Meghan. They want to change. But we've got two very different sort of viewpoints, I think, coming up in the podcast this week, and it'll be interesting to see if they do agree, or their two recollections vary, or their approaches vary to the story of the Nigerian trip.
Yes, that's right. We thought we should react to this Nigerian trip since it seemed rather significant, and a lot of our mates were talking about it. So we've pulled in two of the members of our little repertory company we've created around this podcast. We have Dai Davies, Royal Protection Officer, coming in to talk to us again. And first, Simon Vigar, who was on only a few weeks ago, who is a really interesting commentator, one of the sort of better informed and maybe more sensible of the royal pundits. So looking forward to that. Do you want to hear about last week, Andrew?
Yes, always.
Roman women, very different to the Harry and Meghan show, but went down very well, actually. I was so pleased. I didn't think it would get much of an audience, if I'm honest. It is rather different to what we normally do. What an interesting subject, so beautifully presented, said Moonbeep641. This made my day. Rebecca Day made my day. Congratulations, she wrote, on the 500,000 downloads. You two are living proof that male and pale does not have to be stale. Isn't that lovely?
Oh, good. Oh, that's nice.
I'll do a couple more. Oh, there's the Mean Nook or Mean Nook. This podcast is just great. Both of you have so much knowledge to share. Ever since I somehow stumbled across the Traitor King book, I'm hooked. A great pleasure to make your acquaintance, gentlemen. And finally, you'll like this, Andrew. Nick Greetham. I think Nick's been on here before. Does Andrew have a mug saying "Cool Dad"? I bet he does, as he clearly models himself on the Fonz.
I do, in both cases.
And that's pretty cool. So that was fun. But the Harry and Meghan story, it exercises people like few others.
Yeah, well, it does raise very interesting questions about the future of the monarchy. And we have slightly different takes, I think, on it.
I think we do have a slightly different takes on it. But you also have this interesting historical comparison based on your deep knowledge of the Duke of Windsor. And
well, I do think it's interesting, the parallels with the trip to Germany in 1937. I noticed that Christopher Wilson, who's another royal writer, tweeted something on that comparison and was attacked. The inference was that Nigeria is like Nazi Germany, and he took it down. But I think the similarities are that this is a member of the family who's been rejected by the royal family, who's keen to big himself up in front of his wife, and basically cock a snoot at the royal family. And so that's, I think, where the parallels lie. There's an agenda here when the royal family are trying to marginalize the royal, whether it was Duke of Windsor or Harry. And they're sort of fighting back, and they've used a pretty, I wouldn't compare Nigeria with Nazi Germany, but two rather unpopular regimes is not really the way to go.
Well, it's more about the Duke of Windsor parallel. I'm sure most people don't know what you mean, and I'm quite interested in it. Was it very much done to show we can be international royals, we can be superstars, just like you? Was that the motivation behind it, do you think?
Yes, I think it was. I mean, this was a trip that the Duke of Windsor made in October 1937, shortly after he got married. He didn't tell the Foreign Office about it or his family. It was an attempt, it was an invitation to go and look at industrial conditions in Germany, but it was sort of used as a propaganda coup for the Nazis, who got him to inspect concentration camps as well as factories, inspected SS guards, met Goering, and indeed had tea with Hitler. And so they were played. And I think that's the parallel here would be, are Meghan and Harry being played by another regime? And are they happy to be played to slightly embarrass the royal family and to show you that we too have star quality and we too can get the cheering crowds? And I think, particularly in 1937, Edward rather regretted, I think, stepping down. He wanted to give his wife the sort of treatment he'd been used to, and as she might have expected if she'd become queen. And so I think there's an element of that there too. I think what's pushing this trip is really Meghan, whereas I think in the previous trip it was the Duke himself. But
there's been a lot of commentary about Meghan, and that she did well. A lot of people think, even people who are normally critical of her, thought she did well. That it maybe has boosted her brand after a difficult year where she's taken a lot of criticism from the American media and a certain amount of mockery. That she's become maybe more stateswoman-like, a global influencer, a quasi-royal, whatever you want to call it, and it's done a lot of good.
Very cleverly stage managed. I mean, there were only two sympathetic press people there. She's presented. I mean, I think you've made references in the past to Leni Riefenstahl. I mean, it's very similar. It's a piece of propaganda, I think, this trip. It's very little to do with the Invictus Games. It's all about showing Meghan on the world stage. And I think creating a different narrative that she's basically created this very false narrative. The royal family are racist. She's the champion of the underdog. I think what again is so peculiar is they are worried about the invasion of their own privacy, and you hear they are in some ways using their position to push themselves. And I didn't feel that the Invictus Games really got the attention it deserved. It was very much the Meghan show. And what is she doing, spending £130,000 on outfits or using borrowing outfits? That shouldn't be part of promoting the Invictus Games. This was her fight back. Jams weren't doing the trick. So this was her attempt to relaunch.
Well, it probably makes her look a bit more like a global stateswoman than selling jam. That is true.
It does. Actually, maybe we should do our own jam to go in our mugs.
That's not a bad idea, is it? Mongers jam with extra pips.
Yeah, down in the suburbs, don't you have a little allotment where you could produce some jam?
Mostly slugs, sadly. But yes, we could think about that. A line of foodstuffs. Yes, let's do it. All right. Well, we have lots to cram in today. I think we've set the scene already. Should we go to Simon?
Let's go to Simon. Always worth listening to.
Here we go. He is.
So we're very pleased to have Simon Vigar back, commenting on the recent royal news. And I suppose what's really caught the headlines is the tour to Nigeria. What's your take on it?
Hi. Well, it was a royal tour in all but name, wasn't it? You can't really paint it as a private visit, as some people were trying to say, with all the media in tow. The centrepiece was the Invictus Games and Nigeria taking part in the Invictus Games. So that's why Harry was going. Obviously, Invictus is his major achievement and ongoing achievement. 10th anniversary this year, and Nigeria, I believe, the first African country to send a team. So that was the reason for the visit. And Meghan's DNA test results, which she published a couple of years ago, showing her strong links to Nigeria. So it looked really popular. Lots of British media weren't on it, maybe by design. But of course, the BBC do have a bureau in Abuja. So the BBC was there, along with plenty of American media, which maybe is just the way they wanted it.
Well, that's very.
So you think it was quite manufactured?
Sorry, Andrew. The way that they limited the press attention and kind of curated the visit. I think maybe previous official royals might have been a bit jealous of that. They didn't have to deal with the press pack.
Yeah, that is fundamentally the difference. We could see it come through in the Netflix series and the book. The issues with the royal rota, as we accredited royal correspondents are called, where there has to be a print reporter there, a TV crew there, and it has to be shared around. That's clearly something that Harry and Meghan have got big issues with, and they don't have to deal with that now that they're not officially working members of the royal family. They can do it exactly the way they want, and invite the journalists that they want to go on the trip.
Why did they do this tour? I mean, ostensibly, as you say, it was for Invictus, but was there another agenda there? Was it about repackaging them, representing Meghan?
I think the children are old enough now for them to be left for a number of days. Obviously, they didn't go on the trip to Nigeria. So yeah, there may be an element of relaunch there. I mean, I've seen plenty of Harry and Meghan trips and engagements, and they are fantastic at them. They always were, and they always will be. To me, as I've said before, it's a crying shame that they're not part of the family firm at the moment as official working members of the royal family. So this is their strength. This is what they're really good at, and they showed that in Nigeria. The late Queen, of course, did give them Commonwealth roles back in 2018. Nigeria's in the Commonwealth, so it was unofficially, I suppose, they're continuing that. It was not as formal. They were able to display, their brand of 21st century royalty. So I don't know if it's so much a relaunch as more to do with they're more free now that the children are a bit older.
And do you think the royal family might learn from this? I mean, maybe a more relaxed approach to their visits abroad now?
Yeah. William and Catherine, when they resume royal visits, of course, the one to Jamaica a couple of years ago is the one that will take a long time to live down. But an official royal tour is a balance between what you want to do and what the host country is requesting, and that's where they really came a cropper in the Jamaica tour, because I believe that they, although I wasn't on it, unfortunately, they were acceding to requests made by the host country, which then some of those photos didn't look so great in retrospect. But William and Catherine definitely try to be less formal. And actually, so are Charles and Camilla on the visits I've seen. When you see them up close and personal, people, they are all, all of these people we're talking about are world experts at meeting people and putting them at their ease. But yeah, I mean, if you're a member of the royal family, there are going to be official functions.
So I was listening this morning to the Daily Mail's Royal podcast. Yes, I have a very sad life. I was listening to the Daily Mail Royal podcast with our mutual friend, Richard Kay. I've never heard people from that newspaper be so positive about Meghan for 5 years. Quite remarkable, actually. She was magnificent. She conducted herself perfectly. Harry was a bit in the background, like Charles in that new portrait. She is on her way to becoming a global influencer, even a stateswoman. I mean, wow. You buy into that?
Well, I mean, I, as I say, she's always been great at these visits. We hear rumours about political ambitions. I mean, she at some point, if that's true, then obviously she'll have to run for some sort of office in California or nationally. But yeah, it's interesting how times change, isn't it? I mean, I view the whole Megxit thing as completely avoidable and unnecessary, but it's obviously gone too far now. And we saw with Harry's visit to London before the visit to Nigeria, literally 2 miles away from his father, and neither of them could make it work for them to meet up while he was in London for 2.5 days.
That was sad.
Oh, terrible. I mean, I believe they are in touch, but they can't be talking that much, because if they were talking that much, okay, Invictus and Harry couldn't possibly have known there was a garden party happening at the same time at Buckingham Palace. But before it or after it, surely you meet up. Yeah, very, very sad. And obviously,
Has it gone too far? I mean, and also we have contradictory reports. Harry, the Charles said Harry was offered accommodation in London. He chose not to take it. That would have been a much easier thing. I mean, what's the truth in this? Who's actually telling the truth? Because we're getting two very different versions of the story.
Yes, I'm afraid, Andrew, I'm going to have so I don't know on that one. The accommodation story is definitely running, and there's briefing on both sides, but I can't tell you for sure whether he was offered somewhere to stay. I mean, obviously there's plenty of places he could stay, and staying with friends is an option too, but it just seems all it doesn't seem to have progressed much or at all. The estrangement, continues, and the grandchildren. I think I mentioned this last time. The grandchildren who the king hasn't met, or the youngest he hasn't met, not coming to London. Meghan not coming to London. It's a crying shame.
I mean, do you think this trip then will help some form of reconciliation, or as you say, is it gone too far, and there's just going to be these two parallel sort of lives?
Well, I don't mean. Hopefully, there's a reconciliation at some point. When I say gone too far, I don't think it will ever go back to what it was. That's the shame. But presumably, at some point, at least with Charles and Harry, there is a reconciliation. That might be a harder stroke impossible with William. Both sides are demanding apologies.
Well,
either side is going to give apologies.
You mentioned William. One of the things that people have talked about a lot this week is a rather astonishing column by Petronella Wyatt, who is very well connected in high society. She claims to know that it's William who's stopping Charles meeting Harry, because it's William who is the difficult one, the stubborn one, the angry one. I've no idea, but it's an intriguing thought.
Well, I think they all can be stubborn. I think everybody can be stubborn, can't they? But this obviously is played out in public. You'll have to ask Petronella. I'm sorry.
We should get her on the podcast.
I can't.
You're an oracle. You know everything.
That. But William obviously is very hurt at the accusation, specifically against Catherine in the book and the Netflix series. The common denominator, the only common denominator at the moment between Harry and William is how ferociously protective they are of their wives, and that plays out on both sides. Both sides feel wronged. And, reconciliation with William is definitely a bigger ask than reconciliation with Charles. And, I think they are in touch, Harry and Charles, but obviously not that much, because they didn't make it work on his visit to London.
Well, it's funny. I often play the role on this podcast of being the advocate for Meghan and Harry. But I think actually you could say what they've done was quite cruel but very effective. They basically threw their relatives under the bus, called them racists. And by doing that, they've established themselves as some kind of new form of alternative, anti-colonial, anti-racist royals or global mega celebrities, whatever you want to call them. And they can go to places maybe that aren't quite so friendly to Britain or have questions about imperial history. And they can play that anti-race card. And I think it's kind of working out for them. And it maybe also works out for them in American politics too. But obviously the consequence of that is they've labelled Kate and Charles as being racially prejudiced.
Well, yeah, but they rode back from that, didn't they? In fact, Harry blaming the media for playing the race card and saying that I never actually said it was a racist comment. And of course, that the British royal family deny being racist, as William said. The commitment to the whole Commonwealth is I'm absolutely sure is sincere. Another thing that you touch on there is whether America is as interested. Is America as interested as it once was in the Duke and Duchess of Sussex? There are plenty of people in America who say no. We'll find out, I guess, in the next few years.
Well, I do wonder whether she might play a role in the Biden campaign. Maybe she won't. A lot of people tell me she's a bit of a joke, but America's so divided. I suspect there's a lot of people who don't think she's a joke, who think she's a heroic campaigner against injustice, which is how she wants to be seen.
And it's so divisive. It's still on social media, anti-social media. It's still so divisive. You're either in one camp or the other. As you can tell, I'm trying to see the good in both sides here, and feel the whole thing is unintentionally, a mess. But I don't know. it's very difficult for her to. I mean, she can get into politics, but it's difficult as the Duchess of Sussex, surely.
Gosh, and I mean, there was some criticism of going to Nigeria. I mean, clearly there were the games there, but I mean, we talked to Dai Davies, the protection officer, who said, this was very irresponsible. The Foreign Office tells people not to go to Nigeria. Do you think there's any basis to that this could also create embarrassing situations going to countries perhaps where they're seen to represent the royal family and
well, I think they had those. On the security, Andrew, I'm sure they had the same level of security, if not more. Now, the same level of security that they would have had if they were still HRH. I mean, you could tell from the pictures there that they were guests of the Nigerian government and the Nigerian military, and you could see that in every aspect of their visit. So I don't think security was an issue, and if it was, Harry wouldn't have gone. So yeah, the military led on that visit. Invictus, of course, is part of the military family, and I think a lot of what they were doing, or all of what they were doing, had massive security around it. So, okay, he doesn't have Scotland Yard protection anymore when he's not in the UK, but that they were certainly very well cared for in Nigeria.
Interesting. So, I mean, do you think is the next stage? I mean, we said it's going to change in the next 2 years. What is Meghan likely to do next?
Well, the acting, I think it's hard to see her getting back into acting because it'd be hard to see the character. But maybe that she still, flame burns there for her to get back into that side of things. As I understand it, the Netflix deal still has a way to run. And I mean, there's only so much appetite for the, as we've seen with, the various projects they've launched. Harry said he's not going to talk any more about the past, but maybe. But he said he'd left a lot out of the book and the Netflix series, so there'll be demands there. I think they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay. But my question is how much interest there is in the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the further they get.
I think they've shown they have a lot of star power still. There's a very small number of people. There are a very small number of people in our world who, by turning up somewhere, can create a big fuss, make it feel special. And that's one of the key roles of royalty, has always been that. And
she is a star. They're both stars. They're both stars.
And I think there's probably room for them to operate, doing their thing, and for the traditional royals to operate as well. But how much better would it be if they could use that star power in the service of William's family and Harry's family and Charles's family and actually Meghan's family now? And it is just a terrible shame they can't get over themselves, I think, in this, what I do a fundamentally petty argument about status.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, too much has been said and done for it ever to go back to exactly how it was. But hopefully, there's some sort of. I personally, nobody likes to see a family like this, and obviously, this is all played out in front of every, camera in the world.
But they don't help it with hints that they might do future books. I mean, though they say that they're drawing a line under the past, there's clearly this sort of implicit threat that they do have more damaging material that they could reveal. Yeah,
but didn't Harry say after the book that he wasn't going to be looking back anymore? He said that he left a load of stuff out, and he said he wasn't going to rake over that stuff. But can he resist the pressure from publishers and TV networks? That's my question.
But she's not signed any NDAs. She kept a diary that she's now sort of hinting at. So there's always this possibility that there's hanging over the royal family about what else might come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And as your excellent book on Edward VIII shows, it's sort of there are elements of history repeating there.
Yeah, well, Andrew is very hot on this. That's what the Duke of Windsor tried to do. He tried to kind of establish a separate royal brand with Wallis.
Yeah.
He did various trips, which at the time was seen as most unfortunate, especially the one to Hitler. That's a different story, maybe.
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, that's been terrific. Now, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We basically hijacked Simon in the middle of what looks like a kind of a lecture hall and say, "Can you
Well,
give us a quick chat?" And he did.
I want to point out that this isn't my crowd. No one's turned up for my summit. Now, I tried to find a quiet room to speak to you chaps. And thank you very much for the mug, and lovely to see you again.
You too. And
Lovely to see you too.
we've all been to book signings just like that when nobody turns up. It's very demoralising.
It's in a different room, honest.
See you soon.
They're
Thank you
waiting
so
for you
much.
now. Okay,
Cheers.
thanks a lot. Bye.
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 Lovely Simon. Sensible Simon. Humane and thoughtful Simon.
Yes, no, he's always very brings it down to the sort of core essentials, and he doesn't get caught up in a lot of the speculation. Very well respected and informed. So, yeah, that's very interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how what Dai Davies says, because he's much more critical of, I think, of what's going on, and clearly writes or speaks from the perspective of someone who's had to organise these tours.
Yes,
and involved.
Indeed. I think I meant what I said though to Simon, that I do tend to be more sympathetic to Meghan and Harry than you are, Andrew. But it is actually a lot of this sort of international profile for being anti-racists, picking up awards. What was the one they got before Christmas? Do you remember the Robert Kennedy Foundation?
Yes. Yeah.
And there was all very kind of sentimental stuff about standing up against prejudice and injustice and being a shining beacon of blah 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 blah. And actually, what's it really based on? It's based on a manufactured argument, I think, an exaggerated account of some conversations about a baby's colour, and a documentary that was very manipulative and was a slander,
I think
actually, a slander on modern Britain. I mean, I go that far.
And I mean, what have they? I mean, I think the royal family's done a lot more for underprivileged communities and the black community than I suspect Harry and Meghan have ever done.
Well, I'm inclined to agree with you. Obviously, we're both middle-aged white people, so it's probably not our place to make that decision about what the world thinks. And I think that's the key, isn't it? The wider world, especially people, with a sense of historical grievance, whether that's in America or in the former parts of the British Empire, or communities that were once slave countries. Those people look at Meghan and they think, well, yes, she gets it.
Well, I mean, there are plenty of Nigerians in Britain who feel that there's a bit of appropriation here. She's cynically playing the race card. And I'm afraid I just don't buy it. I don't feel anything that she does is done from any really genuine belief. I find the whole thing very patronizing, actually.
Well, I think there are a lot of people that do buy it. And maybe that's what they're about. They're about creating this this kind of new alternative version of a global royal couple who are cleansed of all those historical racial sins. Whether it's based on fantasy or a bunch of lies in a documentary, it's kind of working for them, I think.
Well, it's. I think you keep making the point. This is all about building her profile in the States. It has nothing to do with Britain. It's. I think an exercise in brand management, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few years or months. But I think the sad thing is, you say that a lot of people do buy into this when they perhaps should be a little bit more skeptical.
Well,
but what do our listeners feel?
Well, I don't think the average commentators. It depends where they come from. I haven't noticed a difference. I think a lot of our British viewers are sort of 50-50. A lot of our American viewers are actually quite sort of, maybe it's people we've attracted to the podcast. They're quite acerbically anti-Meghan. They see her as a grifter, as a Hollywood chancer, a sort of type that they recognise from different periods.
Well, that's interesting. They're seeing through her. That's good, because that wasn't the case before. Well, maybe we need to do some sort of poll that people can fill in and see what our viewers feel.
We could do it on Twitter. Yes, we could. All right. Well, I suspect we're about to hear some more anti-Meghan comments. Let's see. Should we go to Dai?
Yes, Dai's always good value.
Yep. Right. We're going to beam ourselves into a slightly ramshackle living room in Wales. Had no heating the last time we went there. Maybe they have heating now. Here we go.
We're back to the royals this week with Dai Davies, our in-house expert, particularly on royal security. And we'd love your take on what's happening with this tour of Nigeria with Prince Harry and Meghan.
Well, good morning to you and to your listeners. It's been interesting. I was concerned on a number of fronts. One, what was the real motive? Why were they going to Nigeria, one of the worst, most dangerous countries in the world, to promote the Invictus Games? What was their motive, and what was the motive of the Nigerian authorities, particularly this one general whose name is Christopher Musa? Now, he's an interesting character who was appointed by his president, who's equally an interesting character, and allegedly one of the richest men in Nigeria. Now, to me, I have to question what the real motives were. And indeed, I'm slightly perplexed that they're going to such a dangerous country, as I say, 144th out of 160 odd most dangerous. So you really have to be desperate either for publicity or to make friends with a regime who Amnesty International have grave concerns about, particularly the military and their actions in the northwest, I think it's northwest or northeast of the country. So they were some of my concerns.
But surely she's 45% Nigerian. She's gone back to her roots.
Well, I'm not sure when she discovered her roots, and she's entitled, obviously, as they both are, to go anywhere they like. But if there's a cost to the Nigerians, and if there's any kind of cost to the Invictus Games, then one has to question why go when the British government and indeed the American authorities advise all travellers that going there. So I'm merely reflecting what Her Majesty's government and the United States say in respect of visiting that particular country.
I mean, we've been discussing this, the two of us, because it has similar parallels to the Duke of Windsor's trip to Nazi Germany in October 1937.
Yes.
You know, this idea that he'd fallen out with his father, but he wanted to sort of big up his wife, and he got another country to put on a display to sort of put two fingers to his family and say, you know, we can still live a royal life even if we've been excluded.
Well, I think the parallels are to some extent the same. Clearly, I'm not comparing the government of Nigeria with Nazi Germany. They went there on the 11th of October, as you well know, and it's such an interesting aspect of the Duke's visit there and then, and again with an American wife who he wanted to impress. Now, I say again, they're perfectly entitled to go where they like, but when you go there with a 17 vehicle convoy, it almost becomes presidential. And it does seem to me that they are now wanting, as it were, to build on their royalty factors as against Mr. and Mrs. Windsor, as perhaps some say they should be now, because the Queen herself dictated you can't be halfway in and halfway out. But this seemed to me, and it was a very successful trip from their point of view, but it must have cost hundreds of thousands in terms of security. And I say again, you know, this is a Muslim country. It's got so much poverty. There's so much terrorism. Did you know that over 3,620 abductions took place between 2023 and 2024? So my primary concern, in one sense, was this wise? Well, events have shown it's successful by any definition from their point of view. And if they raise money for Invictus, all 500 who are taking part in Canada later on, then great. But it does seem an enormous amount of effort towards a set of games which will take place anyway.
Would you think something might have been happening in Britain in terms of keeping an eye on it? Would the embassy there have been alerted? Would there be special forces also doing backup? I mean, from your experience of running some of these tours.
A simple answer to that is no. A bit like our embassy in Germany. There was a decree from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, as you know, that only a lowly third secretary was actually sent to meet the Duke and Duchess when they went. No, I don't think special forces would be there. We do train some elements of the Nigerian army in Nigeria, and we have done for some time. To what extent, I don't know. But going back to this general, he's gone twice to be trained by the Chinese, which I find slightly concerning, as their input into Africa seems to be growing and growing. So what was the real what behind the Nigerians doing this? They do nothing without thinking it through. And clearly they wanted some element of respectability. But this is a regime, as I say, Amnesty International have severe concerns about, and indeed the huge corruption, let alone the crime that goes on there.
Would the British official royal family, I think we're going to have to start talking like the official royals and the provisionals, like the provisional IRA, the official royals, they would go to Nigeria, would they not? I'm sure they must have in recent decades.
They did, and indeed, my former inspector Ken Wharf actually went with Diana and Prince Charles some time ago. And again, if there was as it were, a national interest so great that despite all the concerns that His Majesty's government is putting out, and if somebody felt that was so warranted, yes, of course, it could go ahead, but it would go ahead with a huge degree of planning. Now, I don't know how much planning went into the contingency planning of this particular visit, because before you go, you'd have to go out and recce it. So who went out and recce'd this, and who paid for that reconnaissance? Was it the people behind the Invictus Games? Was it Harry and Meghan themselves? So clearly you had to have quite a lot of work done beforehand to ensure all these events and all the rest of it. So in normal cases, that would have been done by professional protection officers in conjunction with the various departments and aspects who were going there. So from that perspective, I always like to think, what were the contingency planning? And again, there were only 4 individuals, as I understand it, actually paid for by Harry. The rest relied entirely on the Nigerian security forces, their police. And I say again, they have a dreadful reputation.
No, I couldn't argue with you about that. I'm not here to argue with you at all. Andrew and I were talking in our introduction about, and I tend to be a bit more sympathetic to Harry and Meghan. I think our audience knows this, that they're trying to project a different vision, their version of what a modern, not even royal, a kind of global celebrity couple can be and can do. And the fact that it's in Africa, and the fact that Meghan is partly black herself and has apparently lots of Nigerian DNA, makes it a very good opportunity to showcase this kind of new take on celebrity, royal, whatever we're calling it. But they are trying to build their brand around this now after having a few disappointments perhaps in the American media. And I think just looking at the pictures that came out, but even in newspapers that are not very particularly kind to them, like the Daily Mail, they would have been thrilled, I think, at the coverage. Don't you agree?
Yes, I do. And I understand your point of view, and I understand sometimes where you're coming from, because I always respect your point of view. I may not always agree with it as far as Harry and Meghan are concerned. It's just the presidential style of this. And again, in the media, and we're talking about it today, we have built them up to be a celebrity status, whether I or anyone else likes it. I'm just concerned that in one sense, they're carrying on using the royal titles when they've trashed the royal family, as I see it. I understand his possible motives for doing that, and you've discussed that many times with a variety of speakers. I understand possibly where he thinks he's coming from. I don't personally agree with the way he's done it. If you've got an argument, I always say, in a family, keep it private. This certainly argument is not private. And I totally disagree with some of the comments that he's made about members of the royal family. So put that to one side. Yes, of course, he's entitled to it, but he's getting this status because of who he was, who his father is. He may not like his stepmother very much, but she is now our queen, and so on and so forth. I respect all of that. I just say this was bound to have huge publicity. Was it to further their cause, rightly or wrongly, or was it to support Invictus? I say again, most of the places they went had nothing to do with the real Nigerians who live, most of them, on the poverty line. I didn't see any visits to shanty towns anywhere. They were all upper class Nigerians as far as I could see.
I thought that was interesting because remember what happened when William and Kate went to Jamaica? And the minute they got close to the kind of real population, there were those really embarrassing pictures emerged, and through no fault of William or Kate's, I should say. but they at least did try and get out into the real Jamaica. Whereas you're absolutely right, whether it was security or just their personal choice, this Nigerian tour showed the much more attractive elements of, and Lagos is a very big and prosperous city. I know this country's got big problems. There are a lot of business people in Lagos making quite a lot of money.
Well, yes.
And in fact, our future leader of our Conservative Party is almost certainly going to be a British Nigerian, or she's certainly heavily favoured to be Kemi Badenoch.
Yes.
So there is that side of Nigeria, and that's the one they stuck to, I think, rather than trying to.
But isn't this just about saying the royal family are racist and we're not, and we're showing that we can go there? And it's quite a deliberate and rather provocative gesture.
Well, I take that view to some extent too. That the royal family, whatever else you think of them, are not racist by any definition. The king is not a racist, and neither is his daughter-in-law. I just felt the timing was odd, to put it mildly. And again, I did question the motives, and I question it again. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. Those are my opinions. And again, you mentioned Lagos being very prosperous. Well, the president is from Lagos. And again, his many billions, one has to ask where on earth he's got to. So to me, they were supporting a regime which many in the world regard with some suspicion. That's not to say the average Nigerian isn't wonderful. I get phone calls from them quite often telling me I've won a lottery and many other aspects that go on with these people. I mean, like any country, they have some really, really bad people. And what I did, looking into them, their government and all the rest of it, was to actually say it's not a time and place that I would go if I was a quasi-royal, as indeed Harry is. The timing, the place, and the presidential style gave me concern. That's all I'm saying. For a couple who think London and Great Britain is dangerous, they went to one of the most dangerous places in the world.
They had their famous, rather farcical car chase in New York, where they seemed to get into a terrible panic over a couple of photographers, and then everything got very hyped up. So you're right about that.
Well, yes, and you had units from the Nigerian army who wear the same as some of the German insignia, the skull. They give me great cause for concern. There are 8,000 allegations against some of the Nigerian military. And here we are, a member or a man from the royal family kowtowing to a nation which Amnesty regards with huge distaste. I just think it's wrong, in my humble opinion.
No, I take your point, but royal people and properly royal people, if you like, the official royal people, they sometimes have to shake hands with people they don't like and don't particularly want to meet. I mean, famously, when Queen Elizabeth met the former members of the IRA, and that was seen as a great sign that there was going to be some kind of peace coming to Northern Ireland, and it must have been very hard for her to meet somebody who was quite possibly implicated in the murder of one of her closest relatives.
Oh, absolutely. And I commented at the time, I took my hat off to her, but she was an incredible lady. Harry is not in a shadow of his grandmother, in my humble opinion. But there again, I mean, we can go around and around on this. I say again, if you were going there, I'd want to ensure you had the best protection. I would advance it. Lagos apparently is one of the most dangerous cities in Africa. And yet, where do they end up there? But they didn't go anywhere near the huge townships that are surrounding the place. They didn't mix with any real ordinary people. So if you have that kind of tour, you'll forgive me for being cynical. I am cynical based on half a century of going around the world seeing nasty people.
Well, I want to ask you about that later, because the mechanism of a royal tour, especially to a part of the world that's dangerous, is fascinating. And I don't think anybody's really ever talked about it very much. So I'd love to know how you set about doing that. But Andrew probably wants to talk more about Harry and Meghan.
Oh, I just have one question. I mean, do you think this will backfire? That in some ways people will see through this rather cynical exercise, and it won't really serve their purposes, or indeed that of Invictus?
Well, again, I'd like to know what the costs were. And I said, and somebody took it wrong in one of the articles I did, or the comments regarding it, when I said, well, we could fly people for better treatment. I don't know how good the military hospitals are in Nigeria, but with the money this would have cost Nigeria, that could have been spent on helping real victims of the army, whether they deserve it or not. Some would say some elements of the army don't deserve much at all. I'm not saying that because I haven't been to that part of Nigeria. I do know it from my previous experiences. So what I'm trying to say is this is not the kind of regime I would be bolstering. And by going there, it's certainly bolstered what some regard as not a particularly good regime.
And what about Prince Andrew? I mean, the protection there has been paid for by the king. I mean, is Andrew under threat, do you think? I mean, from some lone crazed assassin?
Well, Ravak, royalty and VIP, the committee have decided he isn't, based on either history and or intelligence or information. There is always the off chance. And you were talking to the former editor of the Sunday Times a week or two ago, as I seem to recall. And again, it's very interesting, his take on some of this and the media and how things are leaked. Well, intelligence can be leaked too. And that sometimes worries me. Andrew is Andrew. He's been discarded. And somebody way above my old pay grade has decided that he and others no longer merit it. In my day, I think we had 21, 22 who had 24/7 security. Now, somebody's decided that some of them only require it some of the time. Well, I always say, if you're going to do it properly, or don't do it at all. Because a fixated person like the one who tried to kidnap Princess Anne Ball, for instance, he doesn't care. He will do a plan, he will recce it, and he will try and do it. Now, whether that's at an official function or an unofficial function, going to and from, that's where the danger lies. And again, but you know, it's a very expensive business, so somebody has to make a decision who gets it. Somebody has decided that Andrew doesn't want it. In the same way that when Harry comes here, somebody decided that he doesn't warrant it if he's earning money doing Netflix or anyone else. It's a decision based on intelligence, and intelligence, as I often say, is only graded information. And so you have to go with that and then cross your fingers if you like. But I think he's been here often enough now with his own security team, some of whom are ex-royalty protection officers. They know the score. They get a liaison. But in this country, having a gun really won't protect you that much anyway, because it's rarely been used.
And are these protection officers allowed to carry guns if they're not actually working officially?
No, they're not. His ex-officers certainly wouldn't be allowed to carry guns. The liaison officer, if they decide to give a liaison officer, if the situation warrants it, will be armed. But again, that will all depend on the information and intelligence, you know. But he's been here enough times now to show that if he's here in a royal connection, he will get royalty protection and all that comes with it, if the situation warrants it. But it's a fascinating subject. Gets us all talking about it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, isn't the decision independent, or do the royal family or the politicians have any input into these decisions?
Again, that would be at a higher grade than me. As far as I'm concerned, royalty protection at the appropriate level make the decisions based on the recommendations of Ravik. They didn't have that in my day. There was a much smaller threesome, if you like, the Home Office, Royals, and us that made those decisions. It should be based on common sense allied to intelligence. But intelligence isn't perfect. And there are so many threats these days from a variety of different fronts, you know. And I'm always fascinated when I hear some of your speakers talk about it. It's fascinating. And of course, the trials going on at the moment that Harry is pursuing against, amazingly, the Daily Mail. And I know some of the people involved in the Daily Mail. I've worked with the Daily Mail off and on for 20 years, as indeed I did with the Insight teams. It's interesting that Irving says we never used. Well, I did it as an investigator for the Insight team, and it was totally legitimate, looking into some very serious issues as an investigator. I wouldn't know how to hack anybody personally, but you know, people did, and they did. And again, nobody in their right minds would allow that. But it's interesting. It was the hacking into William and Harry in 2004, from memory, that started a lot of this and led to the news of the world and the ongoing issues we have now. So that's all part of the issue, really. And you have to be very careful, because people listening to your phone calls, not only the royals, but those protecting them, very dangerous scenario, really, which could aid and abet a terrorist or somebody who wants to do them harm. So I take that kind of security very seriously too.
And when you were conducting these investigations for the Sunday Times, I mean, where were the boundaries in terms of what you were able to do?
Well, as I would as a normal retired police investigator, really. I went to the United States, to California on one instance, looking at some mafia were allegedly using British ex-servicemen to bump off some of their camp there, and the people that they were wanted bump off. So that's a perfectly legitimate, using my contacts in California from my days, to look into it. I didn't find the evidence, but it's a legitimate role, using my knowledge and experience in that particular part of the world, for instance. But quite often, if there was an investigation, they would either ask for my help, as an example. So Mr. Irving was wrong in saying the inside team didn't use people like me. They did.
Well, that's really interesting.
And do you think that there are too many people who are protected? I mean, do we need to protect all our former prime ministers now the IRA are supposedly well behaved?
Well, that's a very good question, because they all get it. And it costs a fortune. And again, one has to base it on the known risk. I mean, most of a generation now wouldn't know what some of them looked like in truth. Sir John Major and others, people would say, well, you could pass him in the street. You wouldn't know, in most people. It depends, really. And I think each one of them, I think Mr. Blair, or Sir Blair as he is now, will get it for life because of his controversial factors. So you have to take in the risk factors. What did they do? Cameron, for instance, now is back in government, obviously, as the Foreign Secretary. He would get a pretty high level of security because of, one, his previous actions, and two, his current status, really. So each one would have to be, in my view, looked at carefully. Look again at the historical. As you know, there's only been one assassination of a prime minister in this country, but we've had loads of ministers and MPs actually attacked, but mainly by terrorism and or people who are mentally ill or so-called right-wingers. Most of them, I think, maybe are right of mind, but they're mentally ill as well. But of course, we have such a big threat level now from certain Muslim areas and extremists from that side. So you never know, do you? Never know.
Do you think the costs of protection should be made public, or would that be revealing too much information?
No, I think the overall cost, i.e., we say the Royal Navy costs us X amount. It isn't broken down to every frigate, submarine, and everything else. I think on balance, it is not unreasonable that we have an oversight how much we spend on security, and that cost needs to be justified by those charged with it, as you would in the medical profession and any other profession. Costs matter these days, and if it's not being looked at carefully, then it needs to be looked at. When I took over and amalgamated three commands, really, two and a half, in 94, 95, one of the first things I did was look at where we were spending the money and why were we spending that money. Not because I'm some bureaucrat, but there was a limited amount of resources which the taxpayer give us to spend. And that comes under the huge budget that Scotland Yard has. But again, I don't think there's enough scrutiny of how this current commissioner and his merry men and women actually spend their money and what they're spending it on.
Gosh, and there seem to be two debates going on. One is that the police in some ways should have some more protection. They should have, for example, tasers. And the other, that armed police are not wanting to serve in those positions because of the problems if there is a shooting and the problems that they then encounter. I mean, how do we reconcile, in some ways, these two very different tensions?
It's a good question, and it's a current question as far as I'm concerned. I was an authorised firearm officer for 17 years. I was one of the most senior ranks still, apart from protection officers, to actually be able to draw and use a firearm should the occasion arise. And I did that for 17 years in my police service, up to the rank of superintendent. And I was glad I did, because one, I gave an insight to those constable sergeants and inspectors who now do it day in, day out on armed response vehicles and the specialist units we have now. And their training is far, far more. In my day, they gave you a 5-day course, shooting at a target which didn't shoot back at you, and you were called a marksman. Well, that's nonsense. And the truth is, the modern day ones, where you go up in a display area where it's computerized, where you know when to shoot and not to shoot, and tested to an extreme, that is costly. And you couldn't possibly train every officer in that. What you need to do is to ensure that officers within reason have the support and backing both of the government and indeed their bosses. I don't think many currently feel they have that support, both under this commissioner and some of the others. Because the one thing you're taught, that if you pull your firearms out, your intention is to stop that individual. And you're taught where to shoot, the main target area, the head and the chest. And that's because if you think it warrants it, you're going to kill somebody. And it's a horrible decision, but somebody has to make it. And you do it either to protect the public or yourself or your colleagues. And that's a hell of a ask. A lot of policemen and women are simply not up to that kind of decision making. And that's why those who are should be tested to the highest level. You couldn't possibly arm all the police in Britain, 160,000 that there are now. You simply don't have the capacity. Whether tasers are the way forward, I don't know. It's come a long way. In my day, I had a truncheon, if I didn't have a gun, and a dustbin lid. And quite often those attacking me, they were my weapons, and I used them several times. I've been attacked, I'm nearly stabbed twice, shot at. So being there, I'm not always sure that giving people more and more tasers and sprays and other things. There has to be a balance, and I think common sense also comes into it, and knowing when to react and not to react. Tasers are not the be all and end all. Sometimes if somebody's high on drugs, they don't work, and so on and so forth. Yes, they should have them, and they should have them in sufficient numbers that they are at least something to arm the officers. And I take my hat off to the officers who tackled the guy, with the sword the other day, coming at them. So modestly, I've been there, done it. I had a dustbin lid and a truncheon. But
wow.
I take my hat off to those who now have to face it. But it's an amazing
maybe when
job.
we do Andrew and I do our world tour, we can drag you out of retirement and you can help us plan security.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And put me on a cruise line. I think you should go by boat, frankly, and have a nice time going there. But look, protection is a fascinating subject. As you know, I lecture on it now, the history of attacks on ours and the royal families. And you never stop learning is what I would say. But please, those doing it now, learn the lessons of history and translate them into the actions of today and tomorrow. That's crux. And then train your people to the best possible level that you can.
Oh, well, we've covered a lot of ground. It's so good to get your real inside knowledge on this, and your trenchant opinions, which is what we'd expect to have.
Well, trenchant, that's a good one. I'd have to look that up. When I went to royalty, a very posh-sounding superintendent who was with a certain prince says, "I suppose you're the titular head." I didn't, being an ignorant Welshman, didn't know what titular meant. And it meant in name only. Well, he got a shock, I can assure you. I've never been in name only of anything. But I hope I try and be balanced. And I certainly enjoy listening to your views. And I haven't read your book on Diana. I should. It's one of the few I haven't read. So I should look forward to finding it somewhere.
Well, I think you might have to find a copy. You're going to be invited to a drinks party soon. I'll bring a copy for you.
Well, that's very kind of you.
We can drag you out of Wales to London, that is.
Well, I know it's a bit of an effort these days. But listen, as always, it's good to talk to you. And I'm catching up with all your iPod, the pods. So it's
very
always
well. That's double bubble for us. We get to talk to you, and we get your
so
clicks.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I hope others have found it mildly interesting, our chat.
I think they will do.
They will. Thank you so much. We
All
always
the best,
love
Dai.
talking to you.
Yeah, take care. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Good old Dai.
Good. You're a man after my own heart. He's been around the block. He knows what's going on, and he will say it in a very forthright way, which is adds to the richness of the podcast.
I couldn't agree more. Well, I think we've just about wrung every last drop out of Harry and Meghan this week. But
until Wednesday.
Well, actually,
we're going to do it again.
Well, I don't know about all of it, all Harry, all Meghan, all the time. But we are now going back to twice a week. So this coming Wednesday, we got a very special and different sort of show. We're going to be talking to our new friend in Australia, Shauna Kay. How did we come across Shauna, Andrew?
Through Twitter. I think she got in touch, and I began to watch her show, which I think is very good. And we found there's quite a lot we have in common. And I'm rather excited by this partnership. She's going to be our sort of person on Earth down under.
Yeah, Antipodean, opposite number. It'd be like the podcast on which the sun never sets, 24/7.
Yeah.
But yes, Shauna has a wonderful show, a very successful show called The Vintage Read, which started out as a sort of book review program, but she's expanding it in all directions. I can't keep up. She has all sorts of sort of sub-brands, and people just really enjoy her company. And I think Andrew Gold is a friend. I think when Andrew was on our show, he spoke about Shauna. I think then we spoke to Shauna, and now it's all going round and round in circles. But
a lot of his listeners were very keen to have Shauna on the show. Actually, so there's quite a lot of crossover, I think, between all three of these podcasts.
Yeah, so it's going to be an interesting one that on Wednesday. It'll be us asking her questions about her. She's going to ask us questions about us, and we're going to explore the many things that we cover in our podcasts and see if we can push the arguments a little bit further.
Yeah, and she's done a lot in Harry and Meghan, so I suspect we'll be talking quite a bit about that.
I think we will be. All right, but there is more non-royal stuff coming up. We've just confirmed we're going to talk to Anne de Courcy again. Loads of people loved Anne de Courcy when she was on the other day, talking about Tony Snowdon and Princess Margaret. And she's back. What else is coming up? We still have our Putin program. We have some good investigative journalism that we've recorded with a couple of mates of Andrew's. They're really more strong shows. And so we're looking forward to getting into the groove 2 a week. Keep on going.
Yeah, I think the plan is a royal one on one day and then something perhaps non-royal on the other day.
Something like that.
So looking forward to that. Now you finished your book and now I'm starting mine.
Ta-da.
So,
there we go.
The reckoning.
Exclusive. The world exclusive. Only a first draft, though. First draft. These are Francis's notes, so that's going to take me a couple of months too. She's very rigorous.
She's your editor, right?
Splendid. Well, that was a full show. I'm exhausted. Shall we let people go?
I think we should let them to go until Wednesday. Look forward to seeing you then.
See you Wednesday with Shauna from Down Under. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Scandal Mongers podcast. This has been a Podcast World production. You can get in contact with our show by emailing team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandal Mongers in the heading, or via our social media links within the show's bio.